going forward on how we can best get this information across. So I want to put out a trigger warning that if any time any conversation is discussed or any triggers surface within you from any traumatic experiences you've had before, feel free to take care of self, remove yourself, turn off your camera. We just want to ensure that self-care is pivotal during this discussion so that we do not re-trigger anyone or cause any further trauma. So I will now introduce the panelists that will be sharing their experiences, their lived experiences. We have Angie Lawrenson, and if I pronounce your name wrong, please charge it to my heart because I am definitely not intentional with that. We have Leontine Evans. We also have Marisha Brown, Crystal Cardenas Rush, and Jaquela Yarbrough. So these will be the panelists that will be leading us in the discussion. So I will start off with some questions. Panelists, you can hop in at any time and answer those questions. I will limit your responses to 3 minutes. So if I just chime in and say wrap up, that means you have about 30 seconds left to complete your statement. So just a round of questions. Let's get comfortable and let's get started. So the first question I have is based off of your experience. What would have been helpful for service providers to know to best serve you? And if you could, before we get to that, sorry, thank you, Diana. Could you each introduce yourselves? And I'll start with Angie.
Thank you, Ms. Kimberly, and thank you everyone for having me on today. My name is Angie Lawrenson. I am a mother of 3, a 24-year-old son, a 13-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old son. And I currently sit on the board for Survivors Rising. I'm also the current treasurer for that board. And I'm also the chair for the Policy and Legislative Committee for Survivors Rising. And I've had that position for about 3 years now. And I'm super involved with the legislative process. I helped with passage of LB 43, which was the Survivors Bill of Rights. And I also helped with, among a lot of other amazing humans in the world, but we created the Survivors Speak Guide for survivors, by survivors, for survivors. And I've also helped with the Senator's Guide to help promote trauma-informed work with legislators with survivors. I also serve on the board for Lift Up Sarpy County and Concord Mediation. And I would like to then pass it on to another friend to introduce themselves.
So we can have Leontine Evans, please.
Good afternoon. I am Leontine Evans. I am the Survivor Engagement Specialist for Survivors Rising. Also, I do work as a program manager for the Greater Omaha Chamber. I do contract work for several other organizations here in Omaha regarding survivor experience, programming, facilitation. So I co-write a lot of the training that you may have been a part of, and I help facilitate trainings all over. And do a lot of focus groups, anything that improves survivor experience, programming, and services to make sure that we are giving the best experiences to survivors as possible, because there shouldn't be anything for us without us. So I'll keep it just that brief and pass it on to the next.
Marisha Brown, please.
Thank you. Ms. Kimberly, I just want to say you did a good job on my name. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm Marisha Brown, and why I'm here today is just being a part of Survivors Rising. I contract with them to assist with programming needs to support survivors. Also, I'm a federal probation officer in Nebraska, and so I work on the other side with supporting offenders and survivors in this role as well. Super excited to be here today to serve you guys and provide my lived experience as a survivor of childhood trauma. Super excited to share space with such excellent panelists as people in the chat have already mentioned. Also do a lot of work with diversity, equity, and inclusion and improving representation in multiple spaces as well. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you. Crystal.
Hi, my name is Crystal Rush Cardenas. I am currently working with juveniles in the juvenile justice system and their families. So also being formerly like a domestic violence survivor, and I am currently co-parenting with my abuser. We have 3 children together, 15-year-old daughter, 14-year-old son, and an 11-year-old daughter. And then I'm also now married, and I have a 4-year-old and another 14-year-old son. So here at my home, it's very busy all the time with things going on, but still making time to work with other families and provide support for them as well. So I'm just excited to be here with these ladies and maybe provide some input. I am a service provider myself, so I'm very excited about this.
Thank you, Krista. Crystal, I'm sorry, Jaquela.
All right. If anyone sees me rubbing and scratching and itching, I have horrible allergies, so sorry about that. I sound completely different, but my name is Jaquela Yarbrough. I am first and foremost a mom to, I don't even know how many kids, 3 biological kids, officially 7 others legally, but I think I'm a professional nurturer. I'd like to say first and foremost. I am a data scientist and commercial drone pilot. So I have a tech startup company as well as a 3-year-old baby of a company. It's a 501c3 called the Compete Institute of Socioeconomic Policy and Education. It's basically a nonprofit where we look to uplift race equity work within the juvenile justice system and the child welfare system. We do a lot of prevention work. We are providers for child welfare agencies as well as juvenile justice. And I'm a survivor.
Thank you all very much for your introduction. It definitely speaks to the passion that you have with all of the touches that you're making within your realm of your survivor story, etc. So we'll just get started. Forgive me for not allowing introductions. Thank you, Diana, for reminding me to do so. So we'll get started. The first question we would like to ask is, during your experience and your lived experience with becoming a survivor, what would you have liked for service providers to know to best support you during your process? And anyone can jump in and answer that question.
Well, I guess I'll.
Silence is good. Silence just says that you're getting your thoughts together. So,
but once we get started, it'll just trickle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, we often talk about, when it comes to service providers, they assume that they are the expert in this realm, which truthfully you are in what you do, but you're not the expert in my story. You're not the expert in my journey. And so when it comes to working with survivors from a service provider standpoint, we find that if the survivor doesn't want to do things how you want them to do it or where you think they should be, they become disinterested and detached from the situation. So for example, if maybe I'm not ready to leave, maybe I don't want to get a restraining order, maybe that's just not where I am, then they're like, well, what are you here for? What do you want me to do? Where you can still meet someone where they are, you can still have grace and compassion. There should be other services that we can offer that meet people where they are, not where you think they should be. So taking yourself out of it and making sure that they are leading in this situation, instead of prompting with ideas, simply just ask, what do you want to do? Where are you at with this situation? How can I support you? And then you discover that people are knowledgeable and they can make decisions for their own lives. I think when it comes to domestic violence, especially, people don't feel that you have the tools, skills, or confidence to navigate the situation as if it is a choice to be in that situation, or it's because of your lack of education or whatever that you're there. And that's not true. We are just as intelligent, just as knowledgeable, just as qualified to make these decisions as anyone else. And so you don't get to direct me on how to live my life, even if you don't agree with the choices that I'm making. So you're not a savior. It's not your job to save someone. It's your job to help them get the tools so that they can save themselves.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in and add to that?
I'll add to that. I think that was spot on. I was gonna say, I wish that providers would have. I am a very well-known person in my community just because I do a lot of motivational speaking. I used to be a pastor, so I got a lot of. It was more like, oh, you know, I don't really feel like, for one, there wasn't a lot of, when I went to different providers, there was not a lot of discretion, which led to me having to seek assistance outside of my city because there was not a lot of discretion. It was like, it was just a buzz, like, oh, she's in an abusive relationship. This is what's going on. Child Protective Services is involved. This is, and it just kind of spread like wildfire. And because I'm in those circles, it traveled back to me really fast. Another issue that I had was I was made to feel like somehow it was my fault and that I didn't love my kids and that's why this was happening. And so it wasn't in so many words, but it was just like, well, why are you putting the kids through this? Well, why are you, I found myself on the defense all the time saying, hey, I'm here for resources. Like I wouldn't be here if I wasn't trying to get out. So again, I think just really enabling survivors with tools to save ourselves. I think sometimes we get dehumanized and we become this object of people's sympathy, like, oh, you need to do this, do that. And it's, hey, just what are the resources? What are my options here?
Great. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else want to offer?
I just also wanted to just kind of go in here and just say too, like I said, I'm a service provider myself. And so leading with strengths and just reassuring, focusing on what's going good, because like Teen said, like for myself, like we have resources, but in that moment, we like Jaquela said too, we may not, because we are in those circles or we're in those, we know about the services, but it might just be, it's more complicated than that, than just going to ask for help. Just know that there's a lot of layers. And even though you may have the information, we, myself included, go to a lot of trainings and we see all this research and we see all this data, but at the end of the day, we are people who are going through situations and who have many decisions to make on a daily basis regarding the safety of ourselves, of our children, and the implications that our decisions at the end of the day are how they're going to impact like our families. So just be cognizant of that. Like how she said, like we're not saviors. We have to meet people where they're at, regardless of where we feel like they should be at.
Thank you. Angie, Marisha, do you have anything you would like to share with this part of the conversation regarding what service providers need to know?
Yeah, I would just say really quickly that just being mindful that the people that they're working through whatever they're surviving from with or a victim of with, they may still have very loving feelings for. And so just being mindful in the way that we communicate and not villainizing someone that they have affection for, using the language that they use, that the client you're working with uses. And so if they refer to this person as dad or my spouse or whatever, then you say that. You don't say perpetrator or abuser, or you know what I mean? Like you don't start naming what they haven't named, which I think kind of just goes back to what all the wonderful ladies before me have stated about just respecting where they are, but I think it goes a long way also with language and titles that we in the work can just flippantly use just because it's the work, right? But
Right.
it's their life.
Thank you. Angie, I dare not move on until I hear your voice.
Well, I'll try to be really super quick. I'm 30 years post-crisis, so I'm a childhood sexual assault survivor. So that's right. I stay in my lane and I try to stay right there. But when I went through my situation, our service providers actually placed my father, who is my abuser, and I into the same room to try to do some type of mediation for co-parenting. And I ended up going into an anxiety attack, panic attack. And because of that, my mother decided to not press charges against my father. And so that whole interaction just, it stopped any legal precedents, despite the fact that he had been charged and arrested and put into jail. All of that went away because of how we went through the process. And I know with the legislative work that I currently do, that a lot of things that we experienced 30 years ago, we still have issues with in Nebraska. And so there's still a lot of bills, there's still a lot of issues and hurdles that we need to do to help support survivors and help victims as they go through the judicial process. But because we did not press charges, because we did not follow through and bring my father to justice, he was able to come over to Sarpy County and abused 3 other additional teenagers that had single moms. That was his MO. So that's my story that I tell the senators of why this work is so important. But to me, it goes back to that interaction of how I was taken through the process when I had just turned 14. And so there's still, I'm hoping that all of those issues have been rectified when it comes to juveniles going through the process. But just in case, be very mindful of children and where they're at in their process and how much they can cope with. Because I did a lot of telling the adults what I thought they wanted to hear, and I could lie my way through. I was perfectly fine, and I was one of those smart kids. Well, that could get myself out of that situation, and but I needed some extra help. I needed the adults in the room to stand up for myself and help me through that process.
Thank you all for sharing. I did hear some very key points that were made. One being not being a savior, right? Me being the director of the programs here at the WCA, that's one philosophy we have to stand on, is that no one is a savior. You can't save people. You can't come in with that mindset. So I appreciate that comment. I also appreciate the comment about lived experiences. Nothing is textbook friendly. Our lived experience don't necessarily match chapter 3 in a book, paragraph 5, sentence number 2. So I think that was a very poignant comment that was made, is that we have to trust the lived experiences and do not act in a savior complex, because that can definitely stifle the growth of anyone coming out of a traumatic situation. So I'm definitely excited that you guys were able to bring up those key points. So segueing into the second question that we have for the panelists, what was helpful for you during your crisis? What was those things that really were able to get you from point A to point B without further pushing you back in your crisis situation? So what was helpful to you? And anyone can start that and answer that question.
I always tell people that this is like the trickiest question in the world, because I automatically start thinking about the things that didn't help, because there was more of that than what did help. Like Jaquela was saying, there's not a lot of services and programs and things like that as it is, and Omaha is this big. So just, even thinking of going to a place where someone may find out what you're going through, but there's so much judgment and criticism and isolation that comes with these situations. It's so easy to harm and not help. And so I'll try to stick to what helped. For me, it was therapy. For me, it was doing some internal work. It was finding myself. In finding myself, I found God and religion and a support system and all of those things. But to even get there, it was things that I had no control over. Like, I called the police over 17 times. They didn't help. Family didn't help. Friends didn't know how to help. There were so many things that didn't help. The only thing, like, he finally was arrested on something totally not related to me. And then he was separated from me, and that allowed me to move forward in my passions and all those things. But in the meantime, you have people who, well, I ain't taking her calls no more because she must want to be there. I ain't dealing with that. I don't help her because she's still there, not knowing that I did the right stuff. I did what I was supposed to do. I called the police. I called the caseworkers. I called the probation officers. I called and did everything I could, and they would not help. They weren't helpful at all. And even when he did get arrested, and I came home and he was hiding under my bed. He was in my garage. He was in my pantry. Like, so many times that I tried to do what I could do, but there's so much judgment that comes. So what helped was therapy and finally finding myself. But in the meantime, just letting people know that when you continue to isolate someone, when you continue to judge and decide you don't want to deal with them, you don't want to help them, you don't want to take those calls anymore, you don't want to be their safe space, it creates even more of a depression, even more of an isolation, and it only furthers the problem. You're actually not helping by trying to teach them a lesson that you won't be a part of their life if they continue these things, because they need you. They need that support. They need the listening ear, and they need a safe space. So I wish that I had more things that did help, but there just weren't.
Thank you.
For me, I think as I'm listening to Teen, and I 100% agree with her, there's a lot of things that I was like trying to figure out which one it was. So I think for me, it was, the school. I just remember giving them that little bag of food. They didn't ask me. They didn't say, "Hey, Crystal, we see that you pay full price for lunch." They gave them that little, I don't know what it's called. Is it from the food pantry? It's a little bag, like with weekend food, right? So those things helped me because then it gave me something to focus on. I think it was focusing on, like, my kids were excited that they had these little miniature cereals that we didn't buy. Or even, I know I had a lot of people that, because I would say, like, when I was going through my issue, I wasn't I wasn't in the poverty line or considered, like, when people saw me, they'd be like, "Oh, she's fine. She's got everything that she needs. She provides for her children." But just when people thought about my children, and even if it was something as simple as bringing my son a ball or something that they did for them where I could see that joy in my children's face, I think that is what helped me the most, because it almost helped me to focus on, so it helped me to focus on their joy for the moment versus on what was going on at home. I know people also invited me to a lot of just community events, and took it a step further of just saying, "Hey, Crystal, we're picking you up. Like, we're picking you up on this day." And if it was absolutely something I couldn't do, then I would say, "Hey, sorry, I can't do it." But I think for me, it was just support. And unfortunately, it didn't always come from family. So that's what I'm going to say too, just to be mindful of, I'm going to say, for example, for my family, we're not very vocal about it, but I could see it in their face. I could see it in their gestures, that they were not in agreement with what, like, me staying in that marriage. But there was a lot of cultural background, and there was a lot of religious background that was binding me to, or I thought was binding me to, my ex-husband. So just doing, I guess, acts of kindness, that's what helped.
Great. Thank you.
I'll share what helped me is, I think because Omaha is really, really tiny, I had a lot of experience with people and getting people connected places. And so kind of the same thing that didn't help me really did end up helping me. And I would say that was my network, because I had a lot of experience connecting battered women with out-of-state services and just really getting them out when they were ready to get, to that point. And it was just like one day I said, let me make a phone call and see if I can't get here. And if I can mention this program by name, I would hope that they have some representation on this call, is Friendship Home in Lincoln. Saved my life.
Take your time.
So we left in the middle of the night in a brand new Lexus and Louis Vuitton bags. And so people just assumed that in Omaha that it couldn't be happening to me. But when I went to Lincoln, I talked to a social worker. She introduced me to some folks at Friendship Home. I had gotten some people in this program before. And it didn't matter what car I drove. It didn't matter how much money I had. They gave me a place to stay and all the resources that I needed. And they really, 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 I feel like for the first time saw me as a person and not just somebody with money, not a well-known person, not a pastor, not a person that this ideally shouldn't happen to, because people stigmatize abuse. It's equated with poverty. So if you're well-to-do, or if if your kids are taken care of, it's assumed that you don't necessarily need help or that you should be able to get yourself out. But so I made that trek to Lincoln every day, and they gave me it's a brilliant program, and it's called Friendship Home. And they really work with me to secure housing, because when you leave, you leave with what you can get out with while he's not around. And so, I probably had more baby clothes than anything. I had 2 outfits and, no formula. And it was rough. But once I got there, I got involved with so many people who made me a priority, who made me feel like it was okay and that it wasn't my fault, and I'm so grateful. I'm still in touch with some of them. They still call in and check to see if we need resources, which we're fine. But I think that there was a point where I was kidnapped because he didn't know where I lived. He saw me at a gas station and kidnapped me. And I was still able to reach out to the folks at Friendship Home and say, hey, I need help. And it's hard to reach out for help and without Child Protective Services getting involved and it becoming a big thing, because automatically you become the person who can't keep your kids safe instead of the person who's trying to protect their kids and who needs help. And so Friendship Home, it was never an issue of them trying to take my kids or separate my kids. And it was all about preserving my family unit and keeping us safe. And I would send anybody. I'm sure they don't have enough space for all the victims in the world, but I would send them there first. I would send anybody to Friendship Home first, because if you're looking for help, it is there. And it wasn't like you got to wait 2 weeks. You got to, we'll set you up with a counselor. We'll make an appointment. It was like, you need somewhere to go right now. The door is open. So I can say that's what really helped me.
Thank you so much. My heart pours out to you for sharing your story. It means a lot. My heart goes out to you for that. Anybody else want to touch on what helped them during their situation? Right. All right, we'll keep moving along to the next question. In your crisis situation, the things that helped, is there anything that you would have wanted that was right there that could have helped you in that moment immediately to change your direction to getting to a healthy state of going into being a survivor and no longer a victim?
I think one of the biggest things we often talk about is people just don't ask. and you don't know what you don't ask. So I was in several situations with professionals, or like Crystal and Jaquela, I think even Angie stated, people make assumptions based of who you are and where you are. And I've never looked like what I was going through. So I've always had a good job. I've always been able to excel in everything that I've done. That's just who I am. And so people just assume that there was no struggle, there was no need for assistance. But I went to the hospital maybe 11 or 12 times in a year, and there was never anything wrong with me. I just needed rest. I needed an escape. But they never asked if I was okay or if there was anything additional. And then when they do ask the question of, are you safe at home? People don't ask it with intention. They ask it as a check mark, they just have to do. And so you don't feel like someone genuinely cares, or if they can, or they even want to do something if you do answer that question. So if people would have handled me with intention and sincerity, I probably would have been more inclined to actually ask for help. But no one, not one person ever just said, hey, are you okay? Is everything, like, I noticed this pattern of behavior, or I see that sadness in your eyes a lot. Like, are you good? So there's a lot of people on this call who know who I am. And so that's why when you see me on social media, I'll pop in your inbox. Like I if I see your Facebook feed starts to look a little weird, you're not following the routine or patterns, or when I'm seeing your pictures and that look in your eyes doesn't look how it usually looks, I'm going to ask. I'm always going to ask, are you okay? How can I support you? What do you need? Because no one asked me. And that's what I needed.
That's good information for us to hear, especially those that are on the call right now that are service providers. That small little thing of being intentional with service delivery, with follow through, is so very important. And I'm so happy that you shared that, because oftentimes that's not the case. And you're right, there's often times where there are check boxes and there's a process, right? Because we have to be accountable to funders and all that. That's the bigger scheme of things. However, the intentional part of service delivery is that genuine check-in that comes from a passion lens, and not necessarily, I gotta follow these check marks because that's what I'm told to do. So thank you so much for sharing that. A lot of service providers don't understand the magnitude that does when those walk into the door that need services. So I just wanted to make a stop right there to elaborate on that for you sharing that information. So does anybody else want to contribute to what Tina has already mentioned? Is it okay if I call you that, since I'm hearing that? Okay. So is there anyone else that would like to speak to that?
I'll speak to that. I think a huge help would be the police. You're just told to call the police. And I have 7 must be our magic number today with the police, because I have 27 police reports. I had the restraining orders, kept getting the restraining orders renewed, kept showing up to court, kept pressing charges and cooperating with police. And in 2.5 years of abuse that escalated, in my case, I got out right away at the beginning of the nonsense. And I feel like the police just felt like it was just regular par for the course for them. It was just like, oh, people get into it. Well, you stay away from him, he'll stay away from you. And it's so bizarre, because when I was kidnapped by him after I left, I was able to get away, and I went in a quick trip, and they locked the doors, and we called the police. And the police took me back, escorted me back to my children who had been abandoned during my kidnapping. They did not take a police report. So if I did not have the network that I have and no detectives in domestic violence, there would have been no charges pressed. And even with kidnapping and child abandonment and child neglect and all of that, he did 1 day in jail and got 1 year probation without having to take any classes or anything else. And it was still dropped to a false imprisonment. And so I don't really think the courts see the value in a victim. primarily victims of color, because I've been able to advocate for victims who are not people of color, and the outcome is totally different. I feel like I was just another number in the system. When I was even with custody, we went through a custody battle after that. And that history of abuse, according to the law, means a lot. But in the courtroom, in practice, it meant nothing. They were just like, oh, so it definitely didn't equate to what's in the best interest of the children. It was just like, okay, yeah, you have all these police reports. Yeah, you have all these, oh, you were kidnapped. Oh, okay, yeah, you have all these restraining orders. The last renewal was even denied because he hadn't harassed me recently, is what I was told. There was no recent activity, despite our crazy history of abuse. And so I think that the courts and the police could do a lot more to save lives, could do a lot more.
Thank you. Very good points.
Thank you to everyone that is sharing today. For me, what I could have used was someone to really see me, kind of what Teen was saying was, I was 14. I threatened my mother with running away. I was going to take my brother. She had started to get beat by my father when she was 6 months pregnant with me. And so it had been 14 years of abuse that she tolerated until he started to abuse me. So it was one of those that she wasn't going to leave on her own. She had proven that she was never going to leave him. And so I had to take the situation into my own hands. But yet none of the decisions was up to me, and they were completely left up to my mother. And so that's the part that I kind of struggle with. But I also, like, the person that I told initially who helped me do the initial report was a friend at school. So when it comes to childhood sexual assault, typically it is peer-to-peer reporting. And so I wish, and I struggle with different schools about talking to them about the need for peer-to-peer training of how to be able to react to a friend that comes to you with a story. I wish that there was more education with that. Because then, my friend that I reported to, after I was out of the situation and safe, told my whole class, so it was one of those that I was kind of outed and to my school. So being in a small town school, being outed for that, being blamed for what had been done to me was really hard. But I just think that I wish I wasn't in that situation, and I wish that my mother could have stood up. I'm only talking about this because I know she's not watching, but she also knows. But the guilt that she carries with her today, she's constantly apologizing to me, and so I know that there's so many more conversations that she should have had to help with her healing that she's never dealt with or gone through. So those are just a couple of the items I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Real quick, I would add like the ongoing transitional type of care. Again, like Angie, mine was more a childhood sexual trauma. And I think everyone was just like, okay, she's fine. She's not promiscuous. She's not using drugs. She's not running away. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't really have, my abuser committed suicide shortly after I told, which was traumatic. But it was kind of like over, right? And so I think no one talked to me about how I'm feeling now versus how these things may impact me later. And it wasn't until I became a mother that I freaked out. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't trust anybody with my kid, and not even my husband. You know what I mean? Like, I just had such mistrust to the point where it was harmful, right? For my son and my relationships, people that I knew I trusted, but I just couldn't do it, right? And so I just think having the conversations, even if someone is not ready or you feel like they're at a point where they no longer need to engage in services, but having something that like my mother maybe could have received, or someone, just to like plant a seed of what does ongoing care support look like? What can this look like in the future if you're not feeling the adverse, like heightened effects of your trauma now? And then the other thing I wanted to add was the support. I feel like in my situation, Jaquela mentioned this, one of my biggest fears was I would get removed from my mom. And so I endured hell, right, to avoid that outcome. And so when I finally told, it was with a group that understood, the leaders in this after school program. I feel like I didn't have to say it, but they knew my fear. They knew that was the concern. And so they didn't immediately call the police and CPS and like all these things that they're kind of mandated to do, right? They're like, let's just have a conversation with mom. They knew my parents were not responsible for this, right? And so I just think there being conversation about what does this look like where we are protecting the unit, the family unit, because that wasn't where my issue was. If everyone could have that same experience, I just can only imagine.
Thank you for sharing. I know it's not anything that it's easy for you to deal with or to even speak on. So I really applaud you guys sharing this information. I will do a segue. I was looking at the chat here, so I'm hoping Diana is monitoring that. In the process of we're talking and we think about systems. So this is not a question that was on here, but I feel like we need to just touch on it really quick because I've heard the school system, I've heard the court system, and working with providers that partner with systems, right? The child welfare system or partner with, in our case, the Omaha Police Department, and your experience and now being able to talk about that. And I think you've touched on even women of color. We deal with this at an alarming rate that is not proven beneficial for us. So when we talk about that partnership and you dealing with your lived experiences, what would you want a service provider to know and understand about partnering with a system that is not necessarily strategic and intentional about the outcomes or the lack thereof? So what information, what would you share with those service providers to think about before you partner with this system? What is that going to do for those that need these services that are not necessarily served in the manner that if you were not a person of color? So if any of you feel comfortable speaking to that, I think that is something that oftentimes we run from and we don't have discussions about openly. But I think this is a format, since I've heard it repeatedly, what would we tell a service provider that they needed to know before they partner with a system that is geared towards survivors?
I'm just gonna say this really quick. I think sometimes engaging with those systems is unavoidable. It's just part of it. That's what we have to do. But be ready to advocate. Have your eyes open. Be ready to say, oh, that's not right. Or like Jaquela was saying, and Tina said, like, I've seen this look differently when I've advocated for other people. So I know you can do this. You know, be ready to advocate, be ready to give survivors the room and power to be able to advocate for themselves also, but be ready to challenge those systems. Maybe the survivor isn't at the point where they can like push back on their own, but I would just say be ready when engaging in those systems.
That's good. I would add to that, strap your boots up, because like there are certain dealing with CPS and law enforcement at times, most times, is inevitable in these situations. However, there's so much leverage, and I would work to, as an agency, what I did was I used my network so that it can benefit our clients. And so I know a prosecuting attorney. Hey, let me call and see what this looks like. because it helps move things forward. Hey, I need you to pay attention. I know you got 1,000 cases. Can you take a look at this one? This is what's going on today. Can we get him picked up? Small things like that. It doesn't, make a big difference to someone in the agency's side per se, but to that victim, that means everything, that their perpetrator is no longer walking around. It gives them some time to leave, or a break, or some time to breathe. But I would definitely use your network, spend time as an agency developing relationships within the child welfare system, within the juvenile justice system, within the court system, because it changes, it really changes the outcomes. Like I said, the police did not take a report, but because I knew a detective in domestic violence, that she was able to pull that 911 tape and say, this warrants a police report. But again, if I didn't know anybody and I just called, 444-7000 and tried to get some help, it would have been hard. So I would really, as an agency, work on strategic partnerships, because that makes all the difference for your clients.
Thank you.
And I would just add, don't lean on those systems. Like, don't use that as a crutch. I hear a lot of systems saying like, oh, great, I hear that. Like, they have keywords. Like, I hear you say that, I'm gonna get you to Project Harmony. I hear you say that, we have police for that. I have this for that. Like, just lean on those systems. Educate yourself about what those systems offer, what their procedures and policies are, and how they actually work with your clients, and then follow up and have follow through. Make sure that they are actually getting the services that they are promised to get, because there is a big difference between if I call or if Angie calls. There's we've done focus groups that show that there's a huge difference in how clients have been treated based on where they're located, race, all the things. So don't just trust that because a system is in place, that the system is doing what the system is supposed to do. It's still, it is your job. And I hear that a lot too, that's not our job. Like, once they come in here, we got them where they're supposed to go. No, your job is to make sure survivors are receiving the services, then programming that they're supposed to be receiving. So if someone comes to you and they are experiencing something and you have transferred them to the system you have in place, it's still your job to follow through and make sure that they've gotten what they needed. So don't just let people fall off into the abyss because there's a system. You are a part of the system, and you're also a part of their support. So just be intentional about that follow up, follow through, and education.
Thank you, team.
And I just wanted to add to that if you have to work with the system that you, like for myself, so like I said, I am a service provider, so I am part of the system, but they're working with juvenile probation. There are, one of the biggest things is out there is call the police if your child runs away, if if there's conflict in the home. But as a service provider, I know that there are times that I tell the client to call the police, but I know that nothing is going to happen once they call the police, except they're going to get a number that then they will send to their probation officer, but it will be no help whatsoever. Now, if I, as a provider, I could say, like Teen said, check off that box, my job is done. I have given them the advice, solved nothing, and on paper it looks good, but to the family, I can't just leave it that way without having other like backups, or without empowering to do something else while I'm not there. So one of the biggest things that I have been doing over years of working with families is getting to know the services that I am referring to. And I used to be a WCA advocate for sexual assault and domestic violence. And there, I will never forget a training that I got where we did, the training was, I was the domestic violence. You picked out a card. I don't know if you maybe know of this, Kimberly, that you may talk about it. Pick a card. This is your, what you're going through right now, your situation. And you call, it tells you, go to the police, and then you pick up a card from there, and then you get a response that police get. Okay, well, guess what? That was a dead end. So now you start back at the beginning, choose another option, right? Another service. And then with that service, it's a dead end as well. So that really opened my eyes to realize that there are systems that are in place to protect us and to serve us, but sometimes we can't access it, or they're no help to us. So we have to really get creative. And one of the things too that I'm going to say helped me, and that I use this every day with the clients that I work with, is I show that I genuinely care. I will tell you that when I was going through stuff, or even people who I have worked with, when you say, oh, this is, when you say common sense, I absolutely hate. Generally, because guess what? When you're dealing with survivors of any kind, just humans in general, there are no two people that are going through the same situation. So even though you may work in a line where you work with domestic violence survivors or victims, or sexual assault victims, you can't use the same what is it called? You can't use, like, I've done this before, this is how it goes, because that is for me, that was the most harm that was done to me, when it's like, okay, well, you didn't fit in this box. You didn't fit in this box, but so I can't help you. Or they would just, okay, refer me here and let me go. Like, I knew myself that resource, but maybe I had already had the door slammed in my face. So just being really knowing that you have to follow through those services, experience them yourselves, really follow up to make sure that as victims, that we're getting those services that we didn't reach. Because if someone gives me a card and I call and I don't get an answer, or maybe I didn't explain my situation in the correct way, which that's so stupid to say, but I have had that happen to me. I didn't explain it right, so I didn't get the help that I need. But if, as an advocate, I know how to ask for the services, I know who to go to directly, that is the most helpful.
Okay, thank you. Very good points, Crystal. Anyone else want to speak on partnering with systems and the effects thereof? Great. Okay, we'll keep moving on to the next question. And at the conclusion, we're going to I see some questions in the chat box. So at the end of this, we'll allow some of the attendees to ask some of those questions that you've put in the chat. So just bear with us as we get through the remaining questions that we have. So co-parenting. When you're co-parenting now with the aggressor, the person who's caused the traumatic experience in your life, any concerns you have with that and your experiences with co-parenting, and how do you get past that?
First of all, I don't know how to answer how you get past that, because I am currently co-parenting with my abuser, my ex-husband. We share custody of our three children. However, this is where I say the systems, I mean, they're there, help some people, don't help other people. When I got a divorce from him, I was forced to have joint legal and physical custody of our children, because there was even though I reported the abuse, there was not enough evidence to really say he would harm the children. And one of the things that he did the most was emotional abuse. And I just remember my attorney saying, how can we prove that? We can't prove that. We can't prove there's emotional abuse, right? And then you looked, like you said, you looked at my, I was a successful woman, having a full-time job, being involved in the community. Where was the evidence of the psychological abuse? So I'm going to say, so parenting with him, that's been 6 years now that I have been parenting. I'm just going to say, at one point, my son, he's 14 now. When we first got divorced, he said to me that, why couldn't you stay with my dad until we were older? Because he was forced to go to his father's house every other week. And the judge thought it was a great idea for us to have 1 week at a time, because my ex-husband did not want to do the every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday situation. So we had 1 week at a time. And the best advice that I got from at that moment, I guess, from my attorney was, don't worry about it, honey. There's no way that he's going to be responsible for those children. They'll eventually end up in your home, which that is the case. My abuser lives 2 blocks away from me. He bought a house 2 blocks away from me. He still manipulates our situation very much, using my children, because that was his preferred method of torture, was to use my children. So if it's my week, his week, but he doesn't want to take care of them, or he wants to go out of town, or whatever he wants to do, he'll make sure that the children are at my house. And if I give any and buts, he will tell my children, oh, well, your mom doesn't want you over there. You guys are bothering your mom, and will very much make it seem like I'm the one that doesn't want them here, even though it is his week. And I've gone to, my oldest daughter lives with me now I think for like 4 years now. I tried to put child support, couldn't put child support because there was an agreement already, even though she'd been living with me. I tried to go to court to get that amended, but they said, well, I'm in Sarpy. So they said in Sarpy County, what they will do is they will tell you to send her back to his house. And that was something that was not an option for me, because she didn't want to be there. He had abused her as well. So I said, you know what, I'm not putting my daughter through that. So right now, very much, I just want everybody to know, like, I don't know that there's a right or wrong, but very much don't think that once a person is gone, or the abuser is out of the picture, because guess what? They still have parental rights that you can't escape those. So they still have, I know I couldn't put my children in therapy at the beginning because he did not give permission for them to go to therapy. So there were systems in place that I understand why, that these same systems, rights for dads, are great for some dads, but they are also the systems that our abusers use to continue to manipulate us and to continue to control us when we are away from them. So the concerns as parenting, I am constantly worried that my ex-husband is manipulating my children, that he's abusing my children. He's very much a hands-off father, but still has them because that's a way to control me through my children. Even though I am married and I have another child and I've moved on, he still uses my children to control my household. And I could push back, but at the end of the day, the only people that get hurt are my children, because how do I explain my children want to be here with me, and if I send them back to their home or back to their father's house, it's still at the end of the day will come back on mom didn't want me, we have to be over here because and they know the court, because I had to have conversations with them, age appropriate, of course, like just letting them know, like, I want you to be here with me, but this is what we have to do. And he very much uses those systems against me. So he will tell my children, I will take your mom to court. You will have to testify. So those things, he very much still uses them to abuse, to control, to manipulate. So I don't know that there's a way that we really ever, unless, parenting rights are severed. And even then they find ways to still come back. So I'm going to say, be also mindful when you have clients who are still co-parenting, because just because we are away from the abuser doesn't mean that all of that goes away, because he's not present. And this is another reason why people probably don't leave, because at least when the abuser is at home, you feel like you have some sort of control on your children's lives or in your life. Because very much, I'm going to say, I feel helpless when they are at his house, and he doesn't when they were younger, he would not let them call me on his week. And that was something that apparently the law was okay with. But just the concerns are that you still worry, you feel helpless. You can't prove, if you might have a feeling that there's abuse going on in that home, but you can't prove it, because again, the children will not say, you don't know what they're being told or manipulated or controlled. So those are some of just a little bit of the concerns.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. Very valid concerns, a lot of concerns, and listening to you speak about the inability to potentially protect them in your absence is something that I can definitely say is probably very challenging. So thank you for sharing that in some of those concerns that you have that you've mentioned. So even into stay in the co-parenting part, but just segue a little bit regarding just being a mother, being a mother, being a victim. How have you navigated motherhood as a survivor? What things have you done to navigate being a healthy mom to your children?
One thing that we did was we had a lot of childhood trauma, and my mom was always in an abusive relationship, and she never left. So one thing I always did is I have open communication. Like, I just want to know where my kids' heads are. Like, what do you think? I always ask them, check in and how are they processing it. I just let, especially my oldest, because she saw the most, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about me? Are we good? Do we need to go to therapy? Do we need to go to counseling? But I really just opened up the floor for open communication, and it's okay to feel how you feel, and if that's blaming me, as part of your process, that's okay. Let's work through it. Because I came from a household as a child where you don't say anything and oh well. And this is just kind of your life because you're a child, and your place is not to tell an adult what to do. So I thought I was doing some great things again, because I have all these resources. And then he disappeared for 2 years. And then when his child support got increased, he wanted joint custody. So he had to go to court for that. And I started having like these anxiety attacks, which this is completely foreign to me. So I've been going to therapy, been diagnosed with PTSD. And, but the good thing is he's not, I don't think he doesn't really have a desire to parent more than he wants to try to torment me. So he's not very consistent. So it's not too bad, but the mind does strange things. And so I'm learning at, 30 something that a 30 something me needs more care. I gotta unpack that stuff that happened in my 20s so I can be a healthy 30 something. So, so therapy would be my newest endeavor right now.
Great. Thank you.
Therapy is the best thing in the world. Therapists need therapists. Everybody needs a therapist. If you don't have a therapist, go get a therapist. But for me, very much like Jaquela, I think that I put my kids before me always. And I'm very aware of their emotions, how they feel, what situations make them uncomfortable. I have a 19-year-old son, and the hardest part for me was getting to a place where I can admit that I wasn't a good mom. I think that's really hard for 99.9% of us, to admit that we were in relationships, we were in situations, we didn't handle our money right. We've made some decisions and we weren't good mothers. We weren't good parents. That's the reality of the situation. And so first admitting that to myself and parenting from a healed place. So understanding that he's going to say some things in this conversation that I don't want to hear. And it's, and there's going to be tears, but he has the right to express those things, because everything I went through, he went through. If the lights got shut off, his lights got shut off too. If we had to move, he had to move too, every single thing. And I wish people understood that, survivor or not, just every single thing you experience, your kids experience with you. And we think they don't know, but they know everything. They are so, they're so smart. And so just having that conversation with him, and he, I'll never forget the day he said, I was prepared to do whatever I need to do to take care of you or to make sure you were safe. He was 8. There's no reason for an 8-year-old to feel like they got to go to war for me or they got to protect me. And that crushed my soul, because instead of him being a kid and wanting to be a kid, he was plotting plans on how to protect his mom. And that's not what a child deserves to go through. And so, but I also realized that he said, I never cried. He never seen my pain. And so as a teenager, he never showed emotion. And so as he starts dating, his girlfriends are like, he just does not care. Like, I can't get anything out of him. And that for me was like, he needs help. So I've been working with him on emotional regulation and just explaining all emotions are valid. And even though you didn't see that from me, it's because I wasn't healthy. All people express all emotions. Unless you're a sociopath, psychopath, you express all emotions. And so just getting him to a place where he's okay with that and understanding that the example I set wasn't a good one. The things I saw were not normal. That's not how that's supposed to go. That's not how we're supposed to feel. And so trying to retrain those things and help him have healthy relationships is a battle. But it starts with me realizing I was not a good parent. I wasn't parenting from a good place. And I needed a better parent to parent me. But I was going off of what I had. And so this cycle of generation dysfunction, trying to break that cycle. So yeah, whatever that means, therapy, mentorship, sports, all the things, having positive males in his life that don't do those things, is what I do every single day. And it's still a journey from when he was 8 till he's 19. We still work on it every single day.
Thank you for sharing that. Marisha?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, yes, I agree, therapy. I feel like that's like a universal theme. But one of the things as a parent that I do and have done is teach to those things that I wasn't aware of. Like making sure that my children know if like what they're comfortable with and that you get to say, no, I don't want to sit on your lap, or I don't want to hug you, or I mean, sometimes I feel like when I say it out loud, I sound like a crazy person, and I don't intend to be, nor do I present it to my children in a way where they feel like I'm just some paranoid mom. But just anything like, do you know where you're not supposed to be touched? Do you know where you're not supposed to touch other people? I mean, that sometimes we tell kids, like, we tell them what people shouldn't do to them, but we don't tell them what other people shouldn't make them do either. And so you can have these like age appropriate conversations at such a young age. Like we'll play, like I have my kids think through scenarios of like, if I'm here and mom and dad aren't here, like, what would I do? You know, like, what would I do if I felt uncomfortable and mom and dad aren't there? Sometimes we tell our kids in good faith, you know, that, hey, you let us know, but what if we're not there? You know, like we're not with them all the time. Then what would they do? How would they escape a situation? Not escape like in a scary way, but we can like normalize and have these conversations proactively in a way where if something were to happen, God forbid, or they were to feel uncomfortable, they already have a plan in their head. Whereas I was uncomfortable for years and was just kind of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And I have the best parents on earth. Like they are the greatest people, but it just was no proactive education. And so I think that was one of my takeaways, and that helps me as a parent to even reduce some of my own anxiety about what they could potentially experience.
Crystal?
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, just kind of like Quillantine said, like just open communication, those scenarios that Marisha's talking about as well with my children, definitely. I know, you know, when I like now when I people hear me have those conversations with my children, and you know, I'll sometimes get a comment that's like, you know, you're not letting them be children, but it's like they have already lived and experienced what I experienced, and I know that even now, like I may not know, you know, exactly what they went through, because I definitely, you know, when Marisha was, you know, saying, no, not sorry, Teen was saying about her son, I recall our son, I was still married to my ex-husband, and our son said, when I grow up, I'm going to get a gun and I'm going to kill you. And I believe he was 4 years old. And my ex-husband thought that was the funniest thing that this little 4-year-old could say. But to me, it was so heartbroken. Like I was like, now that I in retrospect, I'm like, what had he seen? Because we thought we kept stuff private, right? But what had he seen that, that at 4 years old, he felt the need to say that? And he said it just in front of me, in front of sister, like in front of his, like to his dad. So just having those open communication, addressing, I mean, I know even now, like with my children, when they bring up a situation to me, they'll call me out. They'll call me out and say, Mom, that didn't seem right to me. I don't like how, my auntie said this. Why does this family member say this to you, but then we'll talk behind your back? So like, I have to be very open and honest. Again, keeping it age appropriate. And then also I think, because just like Marcia said, like we didn't show emotion. For me, I kept everything hidden. Everything was fine. Everybody would tell me, oh, Crystal, you're an optimist. And I'm like, I am an optimist. I'm an optimist, but I was also hiding what was happening at home. So now that my children are growing, I can see that. I can recognize, all right, there's something wrong. They're putting on a face, there's something wrong. And just like I thought I was good, they think they're good. But just addressing the situations that are happening, not, and also validating their feelings and showing. So I know for me, I also have PTSD from it, from that abuse that I endured. And there are days that I will just come home and I will not talk. I just need to be alone. I don't want to hear about your day. I don't want to cheer you up today. Like, I just want to be left alone. So it just takes a lot of, patience from those around you, compassion, affection, words of affirmation, just basically pouring back into my cup. Because with the work that I do, with the household, with what we do, like we're outpouring into people all the time, that sometimes our cup is on empty. And so we just need that affection, that reaffirmation, that extra help. And we don't always ask for it, but just being vocal. I know that for myself, I'm constantly, telling my kids too now, like, you got to ask, you got to ask, because I didn't teach them to ask when they were younger. Now I have to model that. And so if I want something, I used to, from my family growing up, if my mom said something once, I already knew that it was expected every single time. But I'm trying to steer away from that, because again, it's those unspoken things that could lead to other things. And I want them to know, like, clarify with me if you're not clear on something, because that just opens up the line of communication.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share anything regarding motherhood as a survivor? Angie?
Thank you. So my daughter is 13. She'll be 14 this January. And I've had a lot of conversations with my husband. We live in a very safe, loving home. My husband is amazing, and he's very patient with me when we talk about different triggers that I might have. And so ever since I became a survivor and have been safe, I always had a really hard time with seeing fathers hug daughters, seeing fathers interact with their daughters, because in my mind, they're abusing their daughters, because that's how I grew up. Like, that was grooming, it's part of the process, And so I always had a really hard time trying to break from that. So I had to train myself that, like, no, there are healthy relationships between fathers and daughters. I don't know what that looks like because I've never experienced it, but there has to be good fathers out in the world. Like, not all of them are abusers and pedophiles, right? So the fact that she's to the age where my father started to abuse me, there's different interactions that my daughter has. I'm just, walking upstairs, just getting ready for school. That is just a trigger for me. And it just takes me back to when I was her age. And it doesn't help that she's as tall as me and looks like me. And there's just a lot of different things that I have to process on a daily basis that wasn't there when my oldest son came to this age. It's just because that it's her. And so we do have a lot of different conversations in our house than what other people do. We talk about consent. We talk about boundaries. We talk about asking permission to give hugs. We talk about, we have those conversations with our kids. I know we're having different conversations than what other families do, but it's one of those that we're just more self-aware of those type of boundaries that we should set, and make sure that our kids have those set boundaries too with their relationships with their friends. And we do see that at school and different interactions that they have, or what they witness their friends doing at school, because they understand consent, they understand boundaries. And so they will step in, and they have stepped into situations that were not appropriate at school. And so I'm very proud of how my children have reacted, but there's still struggles that I have to go through every single day. So maybe teens should be my counselor. I think we need to hook something up. But no, it's a daily work for me. And I'm 30 years post-crisis. I didn't start talking about my story until 5 years ago. And so there's a lot of survivors out in the world that still have not come to terms with their abuse. And so just trying to be very, have a lot of compassion.
And I'm sorry, Kim, I know we went long on this question, but I do want to just add that you can't be afraid to put names to things, body parts, what's happening, like on the line of what Marisha was saying. I hear a lot of parents when I'm doing sex education saying, we don't say penis and vagina, like, oh God, those are adult words. Those are not adult words. We all have these body parts. And when your child is saying, well, someone's touching my cookie, they're not alarmed by that. And when they know how to name their body parts, it makes having that conversation so much harder. So by teaching them what things actually are, we can speak to what's actually happening. I'd rather a little girl or a little boy say, someone has touched my penis or my vagina versus my cookie, my pocketbook, all those little cute little names out there, as we just need to be clear and direct about what things are so that we can know what's happening.
Right. Thank you for that. Yes, that is absolutely correct. I was just going to touch on even healing yourselves and being the best mother that you can be at this point is very courageous, because I know there's obstacles that are there on a daily basis that we all push through as we stay in our place of survival. So I heard a lot of things and resonate with me with generational trauma and getting past that and understand the effects of that that's passed down to our children, and how do we eradicate that and get rid of that stigma related to some of the victimization that we as survivors have dealt with. So I hear it. I love it. I love that we are using the correct terminology. I have a grand princess that I do not allow her mother, who is a preschool teacher, to give special names. We don't do secrets. I don't believe in that. Was not raised in that. They're called surprises because they're going to be great for you. We don't talk about secrets. So I love that you guys have implemented some of those strategies in a healing place to say, this is how I'm mothering through my survival space. And these are some of the techniques that I'm using, but then most importantly, the effective communication that you're having with your children. Oftentimes we don't want to hear certain things, but it's best that we do. And it's best to not become defensive, but to become accountable, because I don't want you to go through what I've gone through. And because of that, say what you will to me and I will absorb it and we'll work through this. So I am so pleased with some of the things you've shared thus far with in your healing space and being the best mother that you can be to your children. So we're going to open it up now to some of the attendees who have questions. So if you've placed a question in the chat box, you can unmute yourself and you can ask that question. We have about 10 minutes to do that. So if you're so comfortable, if you placed a question in the chat box, please unmute yourself and ask the question that you may have for one of the panelists to answer. Or I can just go ahead and start asking the questions. I think that's what we'll do instead. So let's roll it that way. So one of the questions that was asked is, due to the level of trauma endured, do you feel like you have forgotten or lost some of your memories surrounding your trauma?
I personally haven't lost the memories, and I do think that that's important for those who haven't identified as survivors, or even if you have. People often see myself, and like Jaquela was saying, I do a lot of public things and a lot of things in the community, and they're always like, "Oh, she's good. Like, how do you get through that? And you don't cry, you don't have like you must be." I still have nightmares. I still have anxiety attacks. It's healing is like an addiction. Like, you know, they say you're always being recovered. You're never recovered from addiction. You will always be healing. It's a lifelong journey. And so those memories, when I smell Irish Spring soap, it still makes me cringe. My hairs on my arms still stand up. And my childhood sexual abuse was like in just 20 years ago. But those smells, those things, those songs, like there's still things that trigger memories. Or even doing things like this. Like when I have heavy survivor days and I'm speaking and training and doing, I often will have a nightmare. It'll often trigger memories, but I have support. I have a circle. I will vent this out with Marisha after we're done. We'll talk about it. It's always important that you have that support lifelong, that you can vent these things out through, and you can do like I struggled with that with my husband. He had a 5-year-old daughter, and I was like, why are you in the bathroom with her? Like, he's probably an abuser. Nope. Like I had to like call her and be like, is it me? Like, am I tripping? She's like, yes, you are. Talk to your therapist, like work through that. So yeah, it's a forever process, and I haven't forgotten anything.
Thank you.
I'm like opposite of teen. I don't have memories of my mother before I was 13 or 14 at all. We lived in the same house. I blacked out. I've lost complete years of my childhood. My dad, after we had to leave in the middle of the night, he got to keep whatever was left in the house. He kept all the photos. So I have like no photos to trigger memories from when I was a kid. And so I'm missing full years of, I don't remember anything. I don't remember good things. I don't remember bad things. I just remember surviving, just trying to make it from one day to the next. That's all that I remember. And I remember pretty much when the sheriff's department came to show up at the house and I had to report. I remember pretty much everything after that, but I have zero memories prior to that.
I can say that I am, as far as my childhood trauma goes, I didn't really know it was trauma until I was an adult. So I never tagged it as trauma. It was just kind of normal. So for me, they are just memories, but I just kind of felt like you don't pick your family, stuff's jacked up and you get through it. But definitely my relationship trauma, that was my only relationship as an adult. Still has been, hopefully it doesn't stay that way, but I can say that there are some things that, I mean, I'm a person that like, I have a lot of resilience that was just built in my childhood. So I just kept going. And there are some things that, sometimes, someone will bring up to me and say, well, remember this happened? I'm like, oh, I guess that did happen, but it's like, I'm not living it. It's no longer my reality unless I have a dream about it, or like Teen said, tonight I will probably have a dream, or like even right now, like I can smell him, just those kinds of things. But does it affect my everyday life now? Not so much. Like it's, I don't know. I don't want to say it's not a big deal, but for me, life is so much more grand than that small period of time. So no, I don't really have many memories of it.
So I was gonna say, for me, I still live in the house that where my abuse happened. So definitely they're not every day. Not every day, but I do go through periods of, something happens, and it could even be my own children. They do something and they don't know that they're triggering, older say something. And I would say my son is, 14-year-olds tall, handsome. And there's days that, he'll say something that it'll make me do a double take that I'm like, wait, that was something that my ex-husband used to do, my ex-husband used to say. And so I have to, tell myself, okay, one, it's something he heard. He's not remembering it how I'm remembering it. And then two is just telling myself, you know what, move on, let it go. Because it's like I said, it's not an everyday thing where things pop up with memories, but there are things, because I was also a, rape survivor, and I was molested as a child, as well. So sometimes the things that I go through during my day will re-trigger not my domestic violence, but it will trigger my sexual assault or my abuse, and just those memories. Like I'm very, kind of like Angie said, I'm always, I look at interactions between males and girls or women, and I'm constantly talking about it. But one thing, that just as of recently, I kind of thought was I need to teach it the other way too. Like, just what if my son got abused by a female, or my son? So, because I think about it from my point of view, but that also makes me be conscious of, like, I need to also be paying attention to my son, to make sure he's in high school now. And so, to make sure that, he's being respected, and he knows, like, he gets rid of, we do away with these, like, I'm going to say, like, old ways of thinking of, like, oh, if a older woman approaches you, that just validates that you're handsome, or that you're not going to be taken advantage of because you have control. I still have to then come back and then tell him, like, no, what is a 19-year-old trying to talk to a 14-year-old? What is an 18-year-old trying to talk to a 14-year-old? Like, what do you so I just have to have those conversations, because I think that stuff, the memories that get triggered, I may not have happened to me myself, but maybe I saw it in my brother. So just the memories are there, just not every single day, but definitely I go through periods where they're more prominent. I could have a heavy day of memories one day, and the next day it'll be nothing.
Great. Thank you. Next question that we're going to go to, it's coming from a nurse. I have a responsibility to report abuse. I hear how CPS involvement is a real fear for victims/survivors. How do you feel we providers can mediate this for you? Loaded question because of the mandatory reporting. Anyone want to take it? Team?
One, just make sure, once again, that you're not putting yourself taking that responsibility to fix the situation or save the situation. But for anybody working with survivors, especially when it's mandatory reporting situations, I always say, communicate. Create safe boundaries from the beginning. From day one, when you meet a family or whatever the case may be, it's, hey, this is what this looks like. If this ever happens, this is what's going to happen. Like, here's how this chain of events works. If something comes out of any way, and you had no idea that would happen, I still communicate. Like, I am a mandatory reporter. This is why this has to happen. It's not a me thing. I always like to know what's going to happen. I don't like surprises ever. Like, situations, over communicating is always better than under communicating. And I think, like, I've had to call CPS several times with clients and things like that, but they know that I will. Like, it's always a boundary that's established in the beginning of our relationship. And it's not because I don't like you. It's not because I think you're a horrible person. It's because this is a part of the job. We're not friends. And so establishing clear, concise boundaries from the beginning of the relationship and over communicating takes a lot of the anxiety and frustrations out of those hard situations.
Great.
I just want to add to that also, like, communicating all of what you know. Sometimes those snapshot situations can look like oh, Tina's just a bad mom. Well, but you've seen lots of protective factors, you know, more information that maybe is mandatory to be included in the report. And so I would just say communicate the whole picture or your understanding of the situation. Like, this is the situation that made me have to make the call. But in my time of working with or seeing, or even in the moment that if it was the nurse situation where you just saw them for 20 minutes, you know what I mean? Like, this is what I've seen also. And if you haven't seen anything outside of that, then just say that. You know, I would also add that, just to be clear, I haven't seen anything outside of this 5-minute interaction or whatever. I think that just gives context to the people that are doing the assessment.
Would anyone else like to chime in and answer that question?
I would just say that I'm on oh, sorry. I would just like to say that I'm a part of a steering committee. I have reported a lot of these issues to the folks who write the structured decision making, and we are in the process of revising that tool so that it is not racially biased. So, and those are some things that we are definitely touching on is, hey, can we make this tool more efficient and require people to say exactly what they know, what that interaction has been with the family, because that's big. If you've only known people for 2 minutes, you can't say, oh, this child is dirty and not being taken care of. So.
Great. Effective communication, I would have to echo that. Coming from the CPS world, I think that it's very beneficial that upfront you share the definition of a mandatory reporter. Oftentimes people hear mandatory and report and you just stop there, but giving some context behind that will definitely soften the call. And then if it's a DV situation, having the mother who is being the protective parent there while the call is made. So she definitely hears everything that was said during that call. So she's not put on the defense with any information that wasn't shared. So I would like to add that disclaimer to what Tina and Jaquela has already shared in that process, as well as Marisha. So I'm going to take a couple more questions and then we're going to end it. So how do you buffer the negative influence the abuser has on the children during visits, like manipulation, gender role, misinformation, etc.?
I'll say for me, it's just debunking any comments, being honest with them. We get to a point where, you know, I will tell the kids, I'm gonna just disclaim it is annoying sometimes, but I run my schedule through them. Just saying, hey guys, next week you guys are gonna be with your dad. I'm not gonna be available during this time, or if you guys are coming over, make sure you have your key. I try to limit my conversations with my ex-husband, just because he has a habit of putting me on speaker when they are there. So limiting to text and calls when they do have questions like, Mom, my dad said this, because they're getting to that point where they're comfortable to tell me like, hey, my mom said this. My dad said you said this. Just clarifying it. If I said something and he's telling it to them out of context, explaining to them the context and just saying, and I just say, if you have a question, come ask me. And that's, so for me, it's just being honest. It's honest with them because they're with me a lot, than just kind of saying, hey, this is my schedule. We have a family calendar in our home. And so if they want to do something, I'll say, put it in the calendar. You got to remind me. Or if they say, Mom, did you put it in the calendar? So that's one less thing that their father can use against me. But just, it's the communication. And then just reassurance is the other one. Because when they were younger, it was just a lot of reassuring, like, oh, I loved you, I missed you. If I would see them out and about, just give them a big hug, and just showing them that they're loved, so that my ex-husband can't use that. You know, he can use it, but it won't stick, because my actions are speaking louder than the words that he's saying.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, Crystal. I always encourage people to not give life to that. Like if your kids bring back bones from your ex or whatever the case may be, don't give life to that. Like if they have questions that are significant, you could answer them. But when we think about our childhoods and whatever, when we started saying I love you to our parents and started feeling love, like no one explained to us what love was. We felt it, right? Like it's not something you could describe. And so kids get to the point where they know what love is and who you are, and they'll believe what they believe and they want what they want. As long as you continue to be the best parent you can be, but be the best parent you can be. Parent from a healed space. Don't parent from a bitter space. Down talking the other parent, no matter how crazy or whatever they came back with, like we're not going to feed into that. So if a child comes back and says, well, dad said that you used to prostitute, and we're not going to be like, well, your dad, I don't want to discuss whatever happened at your dad's house. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If it made you uncomfortable, let me know. But other than that, I really just don't want to feed into that. I love you. Like, whatever, like we just dismiss those things because the more life you give to it, the more that they feed off of it. But kids know. They see you at their games. They see you involved in their life. They know what they know. There isn't one child that I've ever worked with that doesn't get to the age where they make these decisions for themselves. And then they'll be like, okay, dad is a little off. Like dad is tripping, and they're smarter than we think. So just trust your children and give them more credit to know that they will know what's true and what's not. Because it kind of feeds into the trauma, and it traumatizes them when the parents are, well, your dad is this and your mom is this and all the crazy. And so we want to not traumatize the kids as much as possible.
Anyone else want to answer that before we conclude? Well, great. Thank you so much, Angie, Marissa, Teen, Jaquela, and Crystal for sharing your experiences, your lived experience, speaking your truth, giving service providers some information that is valuable to them as they continue to serve to the best of their ability. So again, my heart goes out to each of you. I hope that you all, the rest of your path in life is definitely a cherished path, and that you benefit for all the things that God has for you. So Diana, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and thank you all again for sharing your stories.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Everything that Kimberly said ×2. There really are no other words to just acknowledge everything that you've shared with us, and really highlighting the complexity of trauma, of abuse, of interpersonal violence, domestic violence, all of these really heavy things. There were a couple other things on the chat, and there's one specifically that I did want to highlight before we left, and now I lost it. Brandy shared, she had a question around mandated reporting, but I think everyone already answered that. She also wanted to know if there's a place for common grounds of what the processes or procedures that each resource offers. As far as I know, there is not, but we will be sending out an email with other resources around domestic violence, so we can all grow our toolbox afterwards. Okay, well, thank you everyone again, and we will come back at 2:45 and welcome back Dr. Graham-Bermann to share more of her knowledge.
Thank you, guys.